Lifesavers or coffins on wheels? Why would you not want to be riding inside one of these things?
The armor is extremely thin.
And don't even get me started on dismounting with your gear and weapons.
If those top hatches are closed, the infantry can't get out.
Defenseless against mines and drones. Meanwhile, the American Bradley routinely survives even tank rounds this Soviet scrap blows apart from far less punishment. So what do actual users of Soviet IFVs think about them?
A mass grave for the infantry, literally.
Today we're going to tell you why you would never want to go to war in one of these things. Loudly boasting about the achievements of their own defense industry, real or imaginary, is practically the #1 hobby of Russians. Why? Probably because there's nothing else to brag about, and it doesn't really matter whether the weapon is actually good. What matters is that it has no equivalent anywhere in the world.
Sure, on the outside it's basically a two-seat Su-57, but under the hood it's a full-blown revolution.
The war in Ukraine, with its spectacular failures of T-90 tanks, Iskander missiles, and Pantsir air defense systems, has taken some of the wind out of Russia's sails.
Even the best goalkeepers in the world sometimes let one into their own net.
But the habit of bragging, that one never went away. If you're also puzzled by Russia's obsession with being different from the rest of the world,
don't forget to subscribe to the Weapons of Victory channel and leave a comment.
But in one thing, Russians are actually right. The infantry fighting vehicle concept was genuinely invented in the USSR over half a century ago.
The BMP-1 was the first vehicle in the world with these characteristics. Only after our BMP did foreign equivalents appear, and one of their goals was specifically to counter our BMP.
How did that happen? In the early 1960s, Soviet generals were seriously planning a liberation march into Europe, all the way to the English Channel. The armored personnel carriers available at the time didn't satisfy their ambitious strategists. They needed a vehicle that could match tanks in cross-country mobility and firepower. That's how the BMP-1 was born, a vehicle that even Russian propagandists cautiously describe as controversial. Independent experts are a lot more direct.
The BMP-1 turned out to be extremely poor, especially the armament. The gun had very little high explosive effect, almost no armor-piercing capability, and no autoloader. In short, the weapon was a failure.
So what was the solution? Less than 15 years later, they introduced the BMP-2, armed with a 30mm autocannon that nobody had major complaints about. The BMP-2 was actually the most common vehicle in the Ukrainian military when the war with Russia began in 2014. But armored vehicles were in desperately short supply, so they had to pull older models out of storage and later purchase whatever was left of them from Eastern European stockpiles. What do Ukrainian soldiers actually think about Soviet armor? Before 2022, they didn't really have anything to compare it to. When Western equivalents arrived in the Ukrainian armed forces, it was like a revelation. The short version of the comparison: night and day. And the usual observation applies. Unlike Soviet equipment, Western gear was actually built for human beings.
This thing has everything. Soviet equipment has nothing. With that stuff, it's always, you switched the wrong thing, you didn't press hard enough. Here, none of that. You step on it and go. The computer handles everything.
So what makes Soviet IFVs so dramatically different from Western ones? First and foremost, the philosophy. Everything on a Soviet IFV is optimized for the mission, within the limits of Soviet technology, of course. The comfort of the people actually carrying out that mission was never a concern for Soviet designers, especially back in the 1960s, when a soldier climbed into a BMP with nothing but a Kalashnikov and a chest rig. But by the time of the war in Afghanistan, the amount of kit that ate up space inside the vehicle had grown dramatically. The designers, however, stubbornly refused to notice. Against that backdrop, even the ancient Swedish PBV-302 doesn't look like such garbage after all.
If you compare it to the BMP-1, really to all Soviet military vehicles, this machine was already designed with people in mind, people wearing body armor. You can see how the troop compartment is sized. For me personally, remembering how I used to cram myself into that BMP that was genuinely tough, in here it's more or less roomy.
Same thing with maintenance. Convenience meant something very different in Soviet times.
On the Soviet stuff, to pull the starter you basically had to remove half the engine. Here it's all right there, accessible, nice. The PBV is also smoother to drive. Anyone who's driven a BMP knows that if a gear jams, you've got to wrestle with it to knock it loose. Here it's the opposite. It works like a normal vehicle.
Had Soviet designers ever heard of remotely adjusting track tension from inside the vehicle? Apparently not. If it needed to be done, you did it under enemy fire. And if a BMP-1 kicked off its shoe through a track, God help you.
6-7 hours to retrack it, and that's depending on where you're stuck. Sometimes the mud is so thick you can't even maneuver into position.
But all of that is just inconvenience. What really matters in a fighting vehicle? The firepower and the backwardness of Soviet IFVs hit hardest for those who transitioned to something like the American Bradley.
It's a completely different world. In the Bradley, you're basically relaxed. Everything's automated, you're just pressing buttons. Acquire the target, aim, range it, and engage. In the BMP-1, it's a completely different story. You have to manually range the target using the reticle, line it up, and then walk your rounds onto it.
The BMP-1 was designed for combat on the plains of Europe, but its baptism by fire came in the mountains of Afghanistan. You might ask, what does terrain have to do with it? Believe me, everything. It was in those Afghan gorges that the vehicle's total unsuitability for that kind of fighting became painfully obvious.
Turned out the gun couldn't elevate high enough. The elevation angle was too limited, and the round just punched clean through mud brick walls without detonating.
What did that mean in practice? It meant the BMP-1's cannon was completely useless against Mujahideen, who set up ambushes in the rocks and fired down on Soviet vehicles from above, hitting them in the least armored angles. In theory, the infantry could fire from inside through the firing ports. In practice, that was almost equally useless.
The firing sector is very narrow, and it won't angle upward, about good enough for shooing rabbits off the rear deck.
Ever since Afghanistan, infantry got into the habit of riding on top of the armor instead of inside it. Why? Because it's safer. The BMP-1's armor is just genuinely weak.
What can the armor actually stop these days? Just a rifle round.
And what does that mean? It means the ammunition stored inside the vehicle, with no additional protection, can cook off from any serious hit. When that happens, surviving is basically a miracle. And even then, don't count on it. That's exactly why soldiers started decoding BMP, the infantry's mass grave. Your odds of survival are actually better if you're outside the vehicle. Some armored vehicle, one where using its protection is literally hazardous to your health. How do you like that, Elon Musk? Think that's it? Think again. The twisted genius of the designers placed the fuel tanks in the bulkhead and the rear hatches of the troop compartment, with armor that, as we've established, stops nothing heavier than a rifle bullet.
If an armor-piercing incendiary round hits the rear tank, there's at least some chance of avoiding casualties and fighting the fire. But penetrating that fairly wide, thin strip of steel above the main tank, with the resulting fire, leaves the vehicle almost no chance whatsoever.
You'd think all these fundamental flaws would have been fixed when they developed the BMP-2. But no, the new vehicle simply swapped out the main gun. The larger turret ring actually made the troop compartment even tighter. And the armor? Still just as weak. Deliberate? You bet.
This armor deficiency goes all the way back to the original Soviet concept that infantry fighting vehicles had to be amphibious. Because the plan was to fight across Europe. Lots of rivers, water obstacles, canals, and so on. All of them needed to be crossed. And there wouldn't be enough engineer bridges to go around. So the vehicles had to swim across on their own.
In other words, Soviet designers repeatedly and deliberately traded infantry survivability for speed of advance across a hypothetical European theater of operations. It should be said that Ukrainian soldiers aren't in the habit of complaining, and they're genuinely grateful for whatever equipment they get their hands on. They even manage to have genuine affection for it. But even in their accounts of Soviet IFVs, critical observations slip through now and then, like the absence of air conditioning and terrible heating in winter.
If it's cold in winter, you can open the partition to the engine compartment. That'll warm you up a bit.
Or the total lack of ventilation in the fighting compartment, which can knock the gunner unconscious in the middle of a firefight.
During fire missions, the driver keeps his eyes on the gunner the whole time, because the gunner's hands are on the controls. If the hands drop and the vehicle stops firing, it means the gunner has passed out from propellant gases and you immediately pull back.
Did Soviet strategists ever have a chance to change their approach? Sure, there was still the BMP-3, and once again, they blew it. Russian propagandists usually present this vehicle as state-of-the-art, but in reality it's been in service since 1987. Ukraine received a handful of these before the USSR collapsed. Even East Germany got some. Since the start of the full-scale invasion, Ukrainian defenders have captured several dozen BMP-3s, and now they're using them to hit their former owners.
They were advancing on our positions, miscalculated their strength a bit, and had to run. So we took their vehicles.
And they advanced in the finest tradition of Russian sloppiness. Didn't even properly prepare their weapons for combat.
They pulled these straight from storage without even cleaning the barrels. Nothing. They load around. It jams because nothing's been cleaned. That's it. They just abandoned them. The 30mm wasn't working because they hadn't properly depreserved it from storage. They started firing. The grease inside the barrel heated up and boiled, and a round got stuck inside.
So what does a Ukrainian crew actually think about this favorite showpiece of Russian propaganda? Honestly, pretty skeptical. The BMP-3 is significantly different from its grandmother, the BMP-1, but not always in a better direction. The engine was moved from the front to the rear, right into the troop compartment, creating a kind of hump that makes dismounting even more awkward.
The placement takes up space, so if those top hatches, we call them butterfly, are closed, the infantry can't get out. Getting out is really uncomfortable here.
They also stuffed a lot of electronics in there. But it behaves strangely, to say the least. For example, it locks out the weapon systems if the hatches are open.
The infantry dismounts and runs. Nobody closes the doors. Now the vehicle can't fire again. The commander has to get out, close the hatches and doors, so the system resets. And all of that is time. Time when people are shooting at us.
Maybe at least the armor got a meaningful upgrade on this newer vehicle? Well, sort of. But not by much.
The frontal armor of the BMP-3 is 18mm. It's rolled aluminum, and it was designed to resist the rapid-fire autocannons on Western, or NATO, IFVs.
In reality, that armor more or less reliably stopped a Soviet 14.5mm round at best. NATO small-caliber rounds, only at very long range maybe.
The Bradley's round, and the Ukrainian army received Bradleys in fairly significant numbers, as we know, confidently penetrates the BMP-3's front armor.
But vehicle-on-vehicle duels like tank-on-tank engagements don't happen all that often in modern war. Armor suffers most from drones and artillery, and the BMP-3 is completely unable to handle those threats. This hole in the hull floor was punched through by a shell fragment. It came in on a ricochet, but it did serious damage.
One fragment punched through below the drum, went through the drum itself, and bent around. We tried to load the round, it won't chamber.
So why are Russians so proud of their BMP-3? Because they managed to squeeze not one, but two guns into the turret. A 100mm cannon and a 30mm autocannon.
The vehicle turned out to be fantastically unbalanced. On one hand, it has monstrous firepower, comparable to a light tank. On the other hand, its armor doesn't meet the requirements of modern combat. Certainly not the kind of war being fought in Ukraine.
And honestly, the need for a 100mm cannon at all raises serious questions. It's too weak to take on modern tanks. And a 30mm autocannon handles field fortifications just fine on its own. The only rational use case is as improvised indirect fire artillery, shooting from concealed positions. To wrap it up, Russians went their own unique path, as always, just slightly in the wrong direction. Drop a comment with your take on why Russians would rather put up with discomfort and danger than borrow a page from someone else's success. And make sure you're subscribed. Otherwise, you'll miss the best stuff. Stay safe and support Ukraine.